The year is 1503, and somewhere in a cramped Florentine workshop, a left-handed man is painting backwards in a mirror, dissecting cadavers by candlelight, and designing flying machines that won't work for another 400 years. You're about to step into the restless, brilliant, and occasionally frustrated world of Leonardo da Vinci, though fair warning, you probably won't make it through this particular day without questioning everything you thought you knew about genius. If you're settling in for the night, this is the perfect moment to hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of fellow history lovers who appreciate the slower, deeper stories. And speaking of community, I'd love to know, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. There's something magical about knowing we're all scattered across the globe, sharing these quiet moments with the past. Now let's ease into tonight's journey, back to Renaissance Italy, where one man's curiosity would reshape how we see art, science, and the very nature of knowledge itself. You wake before dawn in Leonardo's workshop on Via de Agnolo, and immediately you're struck by the smell, not unpleasant, exactly, but complex, like a library that's been invaded by an apothecary shop. There's the earthy scent of ground pigments, the sharp tang of vinegar used to clean brushes, and underneath it all, something slightly medicinal that you can't quite place. Later, you'll realize it's the lingering aroma of the preserving solutions Leonardo uses for his anatomical studies. But right now, in the gray pre-dawn light, it just adds to the sense that this place exists outside ordinary time. You're surrounded by controlled chaos. Unfinished paintings lean against the walls like patient guests waiting for attention they may never receive. Notebooks lie open everywhere, their pages covered in that distinctive mirror writing of Leonardo's, a practical choice for a left-handed man who doesn't want to smudge his ink, though it gives everything an air of delicious secrecy. You pick up one of these notebooks and tilt it toward the weak morning light filtering through the workshop's single window. The pages are dense with observations, studies of water flow that look like hair studies that look like water flow, and mechanical drawings so intricate they make modern engineering blueprints look like grocery lists. In one corner, a partially dissected eye sits on a wooden tray, its lens carefully extracted and positioned to catch the light. Leonardo has been trying to understand how vision works, approaching it with the same methodical curiosity he brings to everything else. You can almost see him hunched over this same table just hours ago, making careful incisions while taking notes about the eye's structure, completely absorbed in the mystery of how light becomes sight. It's the kind of work that would get you arrested in many parts of Europe, but here in Florence, under the relatively progressive rule of the Medici family, intellectual curiosity enjoys a certain protection. As long as you're discreet about it, the workshop exists in that peculiar state of productive disorder that only belongs to truly creative minds. Half-finished inventions crowd the shelves, a device for measuring humidity that looks suspiciously like it could also tell time, a mechanical spit for roasting meat that operates on principles of gear ratios Leonardo discovered while studying bird flight, and what appears to be an early attempt at contact lenses, thin shells of crystal that were supposed to improve underwater vision but mostly just made everything look wavy. You get the distinct impression that Leonardo starts about 12 projects for every one he finishes, which would be frustrating if the unfinished ones weren't often more interesting than most people's completed masterpieces. As the sun rises higher, casting longer shadows through the workshop, you notice how the light transforms everything. Leonardo has positioned his easels and work tables with the precision of a theater director arranging a stage. He understands light the way musicians understand rhythm, not just as something that illuminates, but as a fundamental element that can be shaped, directed, and manipulated to reveal truth. This isn't just artistic intuition, it's scientific method dressed up as aesthetic choice. Leonardo has spent countless hours studying how light behaves, how it bounces off different surfaces, how it changes color as it passes through various materials. His paintings don't just show light, they demonstrate his understanding of optics. You find yourself drawn to a canvas that's obviously the famous portrait everyone will eventually call the Mona Lisa, though at this point she's just the Florentine merchant's wife and Leonardo is treating her with the same systematic attention he gives to his studies of water turbulence. The painting is barely begun, just careful underdrawing and the faintest suggestion of color, but already you can see something extraordinary happening. This isn't just portraiture, it's Leonardo applying everything he knows about anatomy, about the behavior of light, about the subtle mathematics of proportion. He's painting a woman, but he's also conducting an experiment in how much knowledge can be contained in a single image. The most remarkable thing about being in Leonardo's presence, and you feel this even though he's currently absent, probably off somewhere examining cloud formations or the flight patterns of birds, is the sense of infectious curiosity. Everything in this workshop suggests a mind that has never learned to accept that's just how things are as a satisfactory answer. Why do birds fly? How do mussels move? What makes water flow in spirals? These aren't just idle questions. They're the foundation of a completely new way of thinking about the world, one that refuses to separate art from science, beauty from function, observation from understanding. Here's what makes Leonardo's approach so revolutionary for his time. He's treating the human body, the natural world, and even artistic technique as interconnected systems that can be studied, understood, and ultimately mastered through careful observation and experimentation. This is the major historical breakthrough you're witnessing, the birth of what we now call the scientific method, emerging not in a university or laboratory, but in an artist's workshop where the boundaries between disciplines simply don't exist. As you explore further, you discover what might be the workshop's strangest feature, Leonardo's collection of mirrors. Not just ordinary mirrors, but curved ones, concave and convex surfaces that distort and transform reflections in precisely calculated ways. He's been using them to study perspective, to understand how the eye processes visual information, and, most unusually, to examine his own artwork from impossible angles. It's a bit like having a Renaissance version of Photoshop, except instead of digital filters, Leonardo is using handmade optical instruments to see things no one has seen before. Historians still debate whether these mirror studies directly influenced his later inventions, but standing here among these gleaming surfaces, watching how they fracture and multiply the morning light, you can't help but feel you're witnessing the birth of ideas that won't fully mature for centuries. The workshop also reveals Leonardo's completely unorthodox approach to apprenticeship. Instead of the traditional medieval system where young artists copy their masters' techniques until they achieve perfect mimicry, Leonardo seems to encourage his students to question everything. You find notebooks filled with different handwriting, different approaches to the same problems. One apprentice has been studying the way cats land on their feet, trying to understand the mechanics of balance. Another has covered pages with observations about the color changes in ripening fruit. It's less like a workshop and more like an experimental laboratory where the main curriculum is systematic wonder. But perhaps the most telling detail is what you find tucked behind a stack of anatomical drawings, a small, worn notebook filled entirely with questions. Not answers, questions. Why is the sky blue? How do tears form? What makes some sounds musical and others just noise? Page after page of carefully written inquiries, as if Leonardo is maintaining a personal inventory of everything he doesn't understand yet. And the remarkable thing is, this notebook appears to be growing rather than shrinking. The more Leonardo discovers, the more questions he generates. It's the intellectual equivalent of a perpetual motion machine, fueled entirely by curiosity. By afternoon, Leonardo has returned to the workshop, and you have the extraordinary opportunity to watch genius at work, though work might be the wrong word for what you're witnessing. It's more like watching someone have a very productive conversation with reality itself. He moves between projects with fluid unpredictability, spending 20 minutes perfecting the curve of an eyebrow on the merchant's wife's portrait, then abandoning it entirely to examine a dead sparrow he found in the street, then suddenly grabbing a notebook to sketch out a design for a more efficient pulley system based on something he noticed about the bird's wing structure. This is Leonardo in his element, and you begin to understand why he has such a reputation for never finishing anything. It's not lack of focus, it's the opposite. His focus is so intense and so comprehensive that every discovery leads to 6 new avenues of investigation. He'll start painting a landscape background and end up conducting experiments in atmospheric perspective. He'll begin designing a fortification and somehow find himself inventing new methods for calculating the trajectory of cannonballs. It's like watching someone try to follow a single thread that turns out to be connected to an entire tapestry. What strikes you most is how physical Leonardo's thinking process is. This isn't a scholar contemplating abstract ideas from behind a desk. Leonardo thinks with his hands, builds his way toward understanding. When he's puzzling over how human joints work, he doesn't just read classical texts, he constructs mechanical models, testing different configurations until he finds one that matches his observations of actual anatomy. When he's trying to understand water flow, he builds transparent tubes and fills them with different liquids, adding small particles to make the currents visible. Every theory gets tested, every hypothesis gets built, every idea gets put through the practical trial of actually working. You watch him work on what will later be called his robot knight, an automated figure designed to walk, move its arms, and even speak through a clever arrangement of gears, pulleys, and springs. It's simultaneously the most advanced and most medieval thing you've ever seen. Cutting-edge mechanical engineering devoted to creating what is essentially a very sophisticated puppet. But that's Leonardo in a nutshell. He can't just invent the future, he has to dress it up in the familiar clothes of the past. The robot knight looks like it belongs in a castle, but its internal mechanisms are pure Renaissance innovation. The afternoon light streaming through the workshop windows reveals another of Leonardo's obsessions: the relationship between human anatomy and architectural proportion. He's covered one entire wall with drawings that seem to argue that the ideal building should be constructed according to the same mathematical principles that govern the ideal human body. It sounds like mystical nonsense until you see how he's working it out, measuring actual bodies, calculating ratios, testing how these proportions feel when translated into built space. He's literally trying to make architecture more human, and it's working. The buildings designed according to Leonardo's principles don't just look harmonious, they feel somehow more alive, more naturally comfortable to inhabit. But here's the detail that really captures Leonardo's peculiar genius: his approach to failure. Most inventors of his era treat failed experiments as embarrassments to be hidden or forgotten. Leonardo treats them as data. His notebooks are filled with meticulous documentation of things that didn't work, complete with analysis of why they failed and what might be tried differently next time. You find page after page devoted to failed flying machine designs, each one annotated with observations about weight distribution, air resistance, and muscle power. Instead of seeing failure as the opposite of success, Leonardo treats it as success's necessary prerequisite. It's an attitude that won't become common among scientists for another couple of centuries, the most bizarre item in the workshop, and competition for this honor is fierce, is Leonardo's collection of what he calls impossible objects. These are devices he's designed and built that can't actually function but demonstrate important principles anyway. There's a perpetual motion machine that almost works, designed to illustrate the conservation of energy. There's a flying machine that could never support a human but perfectly demonstrates the principles of aerodynamics. There's a device for turning lead into gold that fails completely but teaches valuable lessons about chemical reactions. It's as if Leonardo has invented the concept of the thought experiment and then decided to build physical versions of his thoughts. As evening approaches, you witness the day's strangest ritual, Leonardo's dinner preparation. He doesn't just cook, he approaches food like another scientific experiment. Tonight's meal involves careful measurements of ingredients, precise timing of cooking processes, and detailed notes about how different combinations of herbs affect both flavor and digestion. He's even designed specialized cooking utensils, a thermometer for measuring oil temperature, a timer that works by burning specially prepared candles, a mechanical device for turning meat at precisely calculated intervals. You get the sense that if Leonardo lived in the modern era, he'd be the kind of person who approaches making scrambled eggs like he's conducting a chemistry experiment. But the evening's real revelation comes when Leonardo begins his daily review, a practice he's developed of systematically examining everything he's learned that day and connecting it to everything else he knows. You watch him flip through his notebooks, drawing literal lines between seemingly unrelated observations. The way water spirals around a rock gets connected to the way hair curls around a face. The mechanics of bird flight gets linked to principles of architectural engineering. The behavior of light through different materials gets tied to techniques for mixing pigments. It's like watching someone manually construct the neural networks of knowledge that won't be scientifically understood for another 500 years. The major historical significance of what you're witnessing becomes clear as you watch Leonardo work. He's not just a Renaissance artist or inventor. He's demonstrating an entirely new way of thinking that will eventually transform human civilization. He's showing that the artificial boundaries between art and science, between theoretical knowledge and practical application, between aesthetic beauty and functional utility, are exactly that, artificial. Leonardo's genius isn't just that he's good at many different things. It's that he refuses to accept that they're different things at all. As the workshop settles into evening quiet, Leonardo pulls out a small, worn notebook, different from all the others. This one contains what he calls his daily impossibilities, a record of things he observed that day that shouldn't be possible according to current understanding but clearly are happening anyway. Today's entry involves the way certain birds can hover motionless in strong wind, seemingly defying everything known about the relationship between air current and flight. Rather than dismissing this observation or forcing it to fit existing theory, Leonardo simply records it accurately and admits he doesn't understand it yet. Historians still debate whether this intellectual humility was Leonardo's greatest strength or his greatest weakness, but watching him work, you suspect it might be the secret to his entire approach to knowledge. As night falls over Florence, and the workshop grows quiet except for the soft scratch of Leonardo's pen recording the day's discoveries. You find yourself settling into the gentle rhythm of a mind at peace with its own curiosity. The candles burn lower, casting dancing shadows across unfinished paintings and half-built inventions, and somehow the controlled chaos of Leonardo's workspace transforms into something deeply restful. You can hear the distant sounds of the city preparing for sleep, shutters closing, voices calling final goodnights, the clip-clop of horses on cobblestone streets growing more infrequent. But here in this workshop, surrounded by the quiet evidence of relentless investigation and patient creativity, there's a different kind of peace. It's the peace that comes from knowing that tomorrow will bring new questions, new observations, new connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena. Leonardo closes his notebook with the satisfied sigh of someone who has added a few more threads to the great tapestry of understanding, knowing that the pattern will never be complete but finding joy in the weaving itself. The workshop settles around you like a gentle embrace, filled with the accumulated warmth of countless hours of passionate investigation. Outside, the Renaissance world continues its slow transformation, but here, in this quiet space where art meets science and curiosity conquers convention, time seems to move at the perfect pace for rest. Let yourself drift with the soft shadows, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, the seeds of the future are germinating in the mind of one endlessly curious man who refused to accept that anything was impossible to understand. Sleep well, knowing that wonder itself keeps watch over the world.